The massive space station called Kepler Station floated in the darkness between stars. Ships from dozens of different worlds were gathering there, preparing for the biggest battle the galaxy had ever seen. The enemy they called the Void Swarm had already destroyed 3 entire star systems, and now the Allied forces were getting ready to stop them. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his ship, looking out at the other vessels through the main window. The sight would have been amazing to anyone from old Earth. Sleek silver ships from the Zephyrian Empire moved like graceful dolphins through space. The Arcturus destroyers looked like deadly arrows, their hulls gleaming black with energy weapons that could cut through planets. The Corvin battlecruisers were massive things that looked like floating cities, bristling with weapons and shields. And then there was his ship, the UES. Defiant looked like someone had taken a brick and stuck engines on it. Her hull was gray and flat, with none of the smooth curves that made the alien ship so beautiful. She was slower than everything else in the fleet by a huge margin. While the other ships could cross the galaxy in days, the Defiant needed weeks to make the same journey. "Captain," said Lieutenant Commander Lisa Park, walking up to stand beside him. She was his second in command, a woman who had served with him for 5 years. "The fleet commanders are holding another meeting. They want to discuss our ... contribution to the mission." Jake could hear the way she said that last word. Everyone knew what the alien commanders really thought about the human ship. They thought it was useless. They thought it would just get in the way. "Let me guess," Jake said with a tired smile. "Admiral Kethfer wants us to stay behind and guard the supply ships?" Lisa nodded. "Says the Defiant is too slow to keep up with the main battle group. He thinks we should handle logistics while the real warships do the fighting." Jake had heard this before. Admiral Kethfer was the Zephyrian commander in charge of the whole operation. He was tall and thin like all his people, with blue skin and 4 arms. He was also one of the smartest military minds in the galaxy. But he had one big problem. He thought human technology was primitive and worthless. The truth was, most of the galaxy thought that way about humans. Earth was a new member of the Galactic community. They had only been part of the Alliance for 20 years. Most alien species had been traveling between stars for thousands of years before humans even learned to make fire. "Sir?" came a voice from behind them. It was Communications Officer Betty Walsh, a young woman who had joined the crew just 2 years ago. "I'm getting transmissions from the other ships. Some of them are making jokes about us." Jake raised an eyebrow. "What kind of jokes?" Betty looked uncomfortable. "They're calling us the Floating Museum. One Arcturus captain said we should be in a display case, not a battle fleet. A Corvin commander suggested we could be used as a decoy since we're already slow enough to be sitting targets." Lisa's face got red with anger. "Those arrogant, easy," Jake said, putting a hand on her shoulder. "Let them laugh. We've heard worse." That was true. Ever since joining the Galactic Alliance, humans had been treated like the poor cousins at a family gathering. The other species had technology that seemed like magic compared to what Earth could build. Their ships were faster, their weapons were stronger, and their shields were better. At least that was what everyone believed. "Captain Morrison," came a voice over the communication system. It was Admiral Kethfer himself. "Please report to the command center for the final mission briefing." Jake sighed. "Looks like it's time for another lecture about how we should stay out of the way." He turned to Lisa. "You have the bridge? Keep the crew ready. We'll be leaving soon, even if we have to follow behind everyone else." The command center was a huge room in the middle of Kepler Station. When Jake arrived, he saw representatives from every major species in the Alliance. The Zephyrians stood in their group, looking down at everyone else with their superior attitudes. The Arcturus delegation wore their traditional black uniforms that made them look like death itself. Corvins took up a lot of space with their heavy build and thick armor. And then there were the humans. Jake was the only human captain in the fleet, and he felt very alone as he took his place at the back of the room. Admiral Kethfer activated the main display, showing a 3-dimensional map of the target system. "The Void Swarm has taken control of the Helix Nebula," he said in his cold, precise voice. "They have consumed everything in the system except for one planet, which they are currently attacking." We have perhaps 6 hours before that world falls as well. The display zoomed in to show the enemy forces. The Void Swarm ships looked nothing like normal vessels. They were organic, like living creatures made of metal and darkness. They moved in perfect coordination, like parts of a single huge organism. Intelligence. Reports suggest the swarm has approximately 2,000 combat vessels in the system, the Admiral continued. They appear to be harvesting technology and resources from the planets they've destroyed. Each attack makes them stronger. A Corvin. General raised his hand. What about their defenses? What kind of weapons are we facing? Unknown, Kethver admitted. The swarm appears to adapt quickly to different types of attacks. Ships that survived previous encounters report that the enemy changed their tactics and defenses during battle. They learn from every engagement. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. An enemy that could adapt and learn during battle was every military commander's nightmare. It meant that traditional tactics might not work at all. The plan is simple. The Admiral said, "We will jump into the system in 3 battle groups. The first group will engage the main swarm fleet directly. The second group will attempt to rescue survivors from the planet. The third group will hold back as reserves and protect our escape route if the battle goes badly." He looked around the room, his 4 eyes scanning the faces of the assembled commanders. The operation will begin in 2 hours. All ships should be ready to depart by then. Then his gaze fell on Jake, and his expression became dismissive. "Captain Morrison, your vessel will remain here at Kepler Station. The Defiant is simply too slow to reach the battle zone in time to be useful. Perhaps you can assist with medical support for any wounded we bring back." Jake felt the familiar anger rise in his chest, but he kept his voice calm. "Admiral, with respect, my crew and I didn't come all this way to sit on the sidelines. We want to fight." Several alien commanders made sounds that might have been laughter. One Arcturus captain spoke up. "Captain, your ship couldn't catch up to our fleet if we gave you a week's head start. This battle will be over long before you arrive." "Maybe," Jake said, "but we'll still come. That's what humans do. We show up, even if we're late." Admiral Kethver waved one of his hands dismissively. "Do what you wish, Captain. Do not expect the fleet to wait for you, or slow down to accommodate your vessels. Limitations." The briefing ended, and the alien commanders filed out, most of them still making jokes about the slow human ship. Jake stood alone in the empty command center, looking at the display that still showed the Helix Nebula and the enemy forces waiting there. But Jake Morrison had a secret. The other commanders saw the Defiant as a primitive, outdated vessel. They were wrong about that. Very wrong. The ship's slow speed and simple appearance hid modifications that no one in the galaxy had ever seen before. Human engineers had spent months preparing for this moment, and they had built something that would surprise everyone. Jake smiled as he headed back to his ship. Let the aliens have their speed and their fancy weapons. He had something better. He had human stubbornness, human creativity, and a crew that never gave up, no matter how bad things looked. The galaxy was about to learn why humans had survived on one of the most dangerous planets in known space. They were about to discover that sometimes the most dangerous predator was not the fastest or the strongest, but the one that refused to quit. The alien fleet left Kepler Station like a river of light and metal flowing through space. Admiral Kethver's ship led the way, followed by hundreds of vessels from across the galaxy. Their engines created brilliant trails of energy as they jumped to faster-than-light speed, racing toward the Helix Nebula where the Void Swarm waited. The used Defiant watched them go from the station's docking bay. Captain Jake Morrison stood on his bridge, counting the ships as they disappeared into the darkness. Each one was faster and more powerful than his vessel, at least on paper. In 6 hours, they would reach the battle zone. The Defiant would take 3 days to make the same journey. "All ships have departed, Captain," reported Communications Officer Betty Walsh. "We're the only combat vessel left at the station." Jake nodded. "Then I guess it's time for us to leave too. Lisa, take us out. Set course for the Helix Nebula. Best possible speed." Lieutenant Commander Lisa Park began giving orders to the crew. The Defiant's engines came online with a deep rumble that could be felt through the entire ship. Unlike the smooth, quiet drives of the alien vessels, human engines were loud and rough. but they were also reliable, and they could run for months. Without stopping, as the Defiant slowly pulled away from Kepler Station, Jake thought about what was waiting for them at their destination. The Void Swarm was unlike any enemy the galaxy had faced before. They consumed everything in their path, growing stronger with each world they destroyed. Some scientists thought they were a natural disaster, like a space hurricane. Others believed they were weapons created by an ancient civilization. Jake didn't care what they were. He only cared about stopping them. Captain called Chief Engineer Danny Cruz from his station. All systems are running smooth. Modifications are ready when you need them. Jake smiled. Danny was a genius when it came to making human technology do things it wasn't supposed to do. For months, he had been working on secret projects in the Defiant's engineering sections. The alien commanders thought they knew everything about human ships, but they were about to be very surprised. Meanwhile, the alien fleet reached the Helix Nebula right on schedule. Admiral Kethfer's flagship dropped out of faster-than-light speed at the edge of the system, followed by the rest of his forces. What they saw made even the experienced commanders feel afraid. The Helix Nebula had been beautiful once, with colorful gas clouds and bright stars. Now it looked like a wound in space itself. Dark shapes moved through the gas clouds like sharks swimming through bloody water. These were the Void Swarm ships, and there were thousands of them. The last planet in the system was under attack. Swarm vessels surrounded it like insects covering a piece of fruit. Energy beams lanced down from orbit, tearing apart cities and mountains. The planet's defenses had already been overwhelmed. It was only a matter of time before everything living there would be dead. Battle stations, Admiral Kethfer commanded. All ships, prepare for immediate engagement. First battle group, advance on the main enemy fleet. Second group, attempt planetary rescue operations. Third group, maintain reserve positions. The alien fleet moved forward in perfect formation. Zephyrian cruisers took the lead, their energy weapons charging with bright blue light. Arcturus destroyers flanked them on both sides, their black holes bristling with missile launchers. Corvin battle cruisers brought up the rear, their massive guns tracking potential targets. Lieutenant General Alex Stone commanded the Arcturus contingent from his flagship. He was a veteran of dozens of battles, and he had never seen anything like the Void Swarm ships. They moved with perfect coordination, like dancers performing a deadly ballet. As the alien fleet approached, the swarm vessels began to shift positions, forming complex patterns that seemed to have no military purpose. "Sir," reported his tactical officer, "the enemy is not responding to our advance in any recognizable way. Their formations make no sense." Alex frowned. In his experience, enemies who moved in strange ways were usually planning something unpleasant. "Maintain course," he ordered, "but be ready for anything." The first shots were fired by the Zephyrian cruisers. Beams of concentrated energy lanced across space, striking the nearest swarm vessels. The hits were perfect, and any normal ship would have been destroyed instantly. But the swarm ships simply absorbed the energy, their organic hulls glowing brighter as they fed on the attack. "What the hell?" muttered Alex as he watched the enemy vessels grow larger after being hit, eating our weapons' fire. Admiral Kethfer was having the same realization on his command ship. All vessels switched to kinetic weapons, used projectiles instead of energy beams. The fleet changed tactics, launching missiles and railgun projectiles at the swarm ships. These attacks seemed more effective at first, tearing holes in the organic hulls. But within seconds, the damage began to heal itself. Worse, the swarm vessels started firing back with weapons that seemed to be copies of the alien fleet's own systems. "They're adapting," Kethfer said, his voice filled with growing horror. "They're learning from our attacks and turning our own weapons against us." The battle quickly turned into a nightmare. Every weapon the alien fleet used was analyzed, copied, and improved by the swarm within minutes. Energy beams that took years to develop were replicated and enhanced in real time. Missile systems that represented the pinnacle of military technology were reproduced and made more deadly. Captain Sarah Jones of the Corvin heavy cruiser Thunderbolt watched in disbelief as swarm ships began firing improved versions of her own weapons at her. "This is impossible," she said to her crew. "How can they reverse engineer our technology that quickly?" The answer became clear as the battle continued. The swarm wasn't just copying weapons. They were learning tactics, strategies, and formations. Every move the alien fleet made was predicted and countered before it could be completed. Ships that tried to flank the enemy found swarm vessels already waiting for them. Commanders who attempted to retreat discovered their escape routes blocked. Within the first hour of battle, the alien fleet had lost over 100 ships. The survivors found themselves scattered and confused, unable to coordinate their attacks. Against an enemy that seemed to know their every thought, Admiral Kethfer tried to rally his forces, but it was too late. The swarm had learned everything they needed to know about alien warfare. The organic ships moved through the fleet like wolves among sheep, destroying everything in their path with terrible efficiency. "All ships, fall back," Kethfer ordered, his voice defeated. "Retreat to the rally point. Cannot win this battle," but even retreat was denied to them. The swarm ships had anticipated this move as well, positioning themselves to cut off escape routes. Ship after ship was destroyed. As they tried to flee, the lucky ones made it to faster than light speed before being caught. The unlucky ones were torn apart by weapons that had once been their own. Back on the Defiant. Still 2 days away from the battle zone, the crew listened to the emergency transmissions with growing horror. Communications Officer Betty Walsh had to fight back tears as she reported the losses. "The Thunderbolt is gone," she said quietly. "So is the Zephyrian flagship Dawn of Victory, and the Arcturus destroyer Night's Edge. Captain, we're getting reports of total fleet breakdown. Survivors are scattering in all directions." Captain Jake Morrison stood silently on his bridge, processing the disaster. The greatest fleet in galactic history had been destroyed in less than 3 hours. Thousands of ships and millions of lives lost to an enemy that learned and adapted faster than anyone thought possible. "Sir," said Lisa Park, "maybe we should turn around? If the main fleet couldn't stop them, what chance do we have?" Jake looked at the tactical display showing their slow progress toward the battle zone. The Defiant was still crawling through space at a fraction of the speed the other ships had managed. By the time they arrived, there would be nothing left but wreckage and swarm ships that had grown even stronger from their victory. But Jake Morrison had not survived 20 years in space by giving up when things looked hopeless. "We continue." "On course," he said firmly. The fleet failed because they fought the swarm on its own terms. They tried to match speed and firepower with an enemy that could copy everything they did. Chief Engineer Danny Cruz looked up from his station. "Captain, the modifications are ready. We can deploy them as soon as we reach the battle zone." Jake nodded. The alien commanders had mocked the Defiant for being slow and primitive. They had no idea that human engineers had been preparing for exactly this kind of enemy. The swarm could adapt to any weapon or tactic they had seen before, but they had never encountered human warfare. "Danny," Jake said, "how long can we maintain combat operations once we arrive?" The engineer grinned. "With the modifications in our supply, reserves, months if necessary, sir. Maybe longer." Jake smiled for the first time since hearing about the fleet's destruction. The other races had tried to fight a quick, decisive battle against an enemy that specialized in quick adaptation. But humans had learned warfare on a planet where survival meant thinking long-term. They had learned patience, persistence, and the value of fighting dirty when necessary. 3 days after the Great Battle, the UES Defiant finally arrived at the Helix Nebula. Captain Jake Morrison stood on his bridge, looking out at what had once been the most beautiful star system in this part of the galaxy. Now it looked like a graveyard. Pieces of destroyed ships floated everywhere. The wreckage of Admiral Kethber's flagship drifted past the Defiant's viewports, its hull torn open like a broken egg. Chunks of Arcturus destroyers mixed with the remains of Corvin battlecruisers. Thousands of ships had been reduced to scrap metal and debris. "My God," whispered Lieutenant Commander Lisa Park, "there's nothing left." But that wasn't entirely true. Moving through the wreckage like vultures picking at bones were the Void swarm ships. They had grown since the battle, feeding on the destroyed vessels and absorbing their technology. What had been 2,000 enemy ships was now closer to 3,000, and each one was larger and more complex than before. Captain reported Communications Officer Betty Walsh, "I'm detecting survivors in some of the wreckage, life pods, and emergency shelters. But the swarm ships are moving toward them." Jake watched as organic vessels approached the helpless survivors. He knew what would happen next. The swarm would consume them just like they had consumed everything else in this system, unless someone stopped them. "I'll stop," Jake ordered. "Chief Cruz, are we ready?" Chief Engineer Danny Cruz's voice came over the intercom from the engineering deck. "All modifications are online, Captain. We're ready to show these things what human engineering can do." The Defiant came to a complete halt at the edge of the debris field. Almost immediately, the swarm ships detected the new arrival. A group of 20 vessels broke off from their scavenging and began moving toward the human ship. They moved in perfect formation, like a school of deadly fish. Jake studied the approaching enemies on his tactical display. They were beautiful, in a terrible way, with sleek organic curves that seemed to flow like living metal. Energy patterns flickered across their hulls as they prepared their weapons. These were the ships that had destroyed the greatest fleet in galactic history in just 3 hours. "Sir," said Weapons Officer Gary Collins, "they're charging weapons. Same energy signatures we recorded from the previous battle. They're preparing to use copied versions of Zephyrian and Arcturus systems." Jake nodded. The swarm had learned to fight like the aliens, using their own weapons and tactics against them. But Jake had no intention of fighting like an alien. "Gary, forget everything you learned at the academy, and we're not going to fight this battle the way they expect." The swarm ships opened fire first, just as they had 3 days ago. Brilliant. Energy beams lanced across space toward the Defiant. The same weapons that had torn apart the alien fleet struck the human ship's shields. But instead of trying to absorb the energy or deflect it, the Defiant's shields simply let most of it pass. On the swarm vessels, confusion rippled through their collective consciousness. The energy weapon should have either been absorbed by the enemy shields or caused massive damage. Instead, the human ship seemed almost unaffected. The few hits that did connect caused only minor damage to the hull. Jake smiled grimly. Phase 1 complete. They just learned that their copied energy weapons don't work well against us. Now, let's see how they handle Phase 2. Gary, begin random firing pattern Alpha. What happened next was unlike anything in the recorded history of space warfare. Instead of firing concentrated bursts from powerful weapons, the Defiant began shooting everything it had. Small projectiles, mining charges, industrial cutting tools, even modified garbage launched from waste disposal systems. Each shot was different from the last. Fired at random intervals from different parts of the ship, the swarm ships tried to adapt. But there was nothing consistent to adapt to. 1 second they were being hit by depleted uranium slugs fired from railguns. The next second, explosive charges designed for asteroid mining were detonating against their hulls. Then came a barrage of industrial tools spinning through space, like deadly frisbees. "What are they doing?" muttered the consciousness that controlled the swarm fleet. In thousands of years of existence, they had never encountered tactics like this. Every enemy they had faced used logical, organized weapon systems. This was chaos. The human ship continued its bizarre attack pattern, magnetic harpoons designed for salvage work struck swarm vessels and began pulling them out of formation. Chemical sprayers meant for cleaning ship hulls coated enemy sensors with corrosive compounds. Even the Defiant's navigation lights had been weaponized, strobing in patterns designed to confuse organic visual systems. "Commander," Lisa Park watched the tactical display with amazement. "Jake, this is insane. We're fighting them with everything. Except actual weapons." "That's the point," Jake replied. "They can adapt to weapons because weapons follow logical patterns. But this isn't logical. This is human creativity mixed with human stubbornness. Let's see them adapt to that." The 20 swarm ships found themselves under attack from dozens of different systems, none of which made any military sense. Their perfect coordination began to break down as they tried to defend against attacks that had no pattern or predictable sequence. Ships designed to move in harmony started bumping into each other as their formation dissolved. But Jake wasn't done yet. Navigator Helen Price, begin evasive pattern delta. Keep us moving, but don't let them predict where we're going. The Defiant began moving through the debris field in a pattern that seemed random, but was actually carefully planned. Helmsman Price had studied the wreckage for hours, mapping out a route that would take them past the largest pieces of destroyed ships. As they moved, the Defiant continued its chaotic attack. Using the wreckage as cover and concealment, the swarm ships tried to follow, but they had been designed for open space combat in organized formations. Moving through a debris field while under random attack from unpredictable weapons was beyond their programming. Several ships collided with wreckage while trying to maintain pursuit. Others became separated from their group and found themselves facing the human ship alone. "This is working better than I hoped," Jake said to his crew. "They're built for adaptation and learning, but they need consistent data to work with. We're not giving them any." Hours passed. The battle continued through the debris field, with the Defiant leading the swarm ships on a deadly game of hide and seek among the wreckage. The human ship never stayed in one place long enough for the enemy to target effectively, never used the same weapons twice in a row. More swarm ships joined the hunt, attracted by the distress signals from their fellows. But instead of making things worse for the Defiant, this actually helped. The additional ships crowded the space around the debris field, making it even harder for them to coordinate their attacks. Some swarm vessels ended up firing on each other by mistake. Their perfect unity shattered by confusion and frustration. Communications. Officer Betty Walsh monitored the enemy transmissions with growing excitement. "Captain, I'm picking up massive communication activity from the swarm ships. They're trying to coordinate, but it sounds like they're arguing with each other." "I've never heard anything like it." Jake nodded. The swarm's greatest strength was also becoming their weakness. They were so used to perfect coordination that they couldn't handle chaos and unpredictability. The human approach to warfare was breaking their collective mind. "Sir," reported Chief Cruz from engineering, "we're down to about 60% of our improvised ammunition. But the modifications are holding up perfectly. We can keep this up for days if necessary." Jake looked at the tactical display. Of the original 20 swarm ships that had attacked them, only 12 were still functional. The others had been damaged or destroyed by the Defiant's chaotic assault or had collided with debris while trying to maintain pursuit. More importantly, the remaining ships were showing signs of confusion and disorganization. "Right, people," Jake announced to his crew. "Phase 3. We've proven we can confuse them and hurt them. Now let's see if we can make them afraid." The Defiant suddenly changed tactics again. Instead of running and hiding, it turned toward the nearest group of swarm ships and accelerated directly at them. But instead of firing weapons, it began broadcasting. On all frequencies, the transmission was simple: human music, specifically the angriest, loudest rock music that Chief Cruz could find in the ship's entertainment database. The swarm ships recoiled as if they had been physically struck. Their organic consciousness had never encountered anything like human music before. The combination of rhythm, melody, and pure emotional intensity was completely alien to their collective mind. Some ships actually fled from the approaching human vessel, unable to process what they were experiencing. Jake laughed as he watched enemy ships scatter before his slow, supposedly primitive warship. "I don't think they like our music, Lisa." The real test was still coming. Word of the strange battle was spreading throughout the swarm fleet. More and more ships were converging on the debris field, drawn by curiosity and the need to understand this new enemy. Soon the Defiant would face not 20 ships, but hundreds. The battle had been going on for 6 days now, and it showed no signs of ending. Captain Jake Morrison had never fought a war like this before, and he was pretty sure no one else in the galaxy had either. Most space battles lasted a few hours, at most. This one was turning into something completely different. The UES Defiant moved slowly through the Helix Nebula like a patient hunter tracking its prey. Behind them, hundreds of void swarm ships followed in confused pursuit. The organic vessels that had once moved in perfect harmony now struggled to maintain any kind of organization. Their collective mind was fracturing under the constant stress of trying to adapt to an enemy that refused to be predictable. "Status report?" Jake called out as he walked around the bridge. His crew had been working in shifts for nearly a week, but their spirits remained high. They were winning, and everyone could feel it. "We're down to 40% of our modified ammunition," reported Weapons Officer Gary Collins. "But Chief Cruz has been working miracles down in engineering. He's turned our food processors into projectile launchers and our medical scanners into targeting systems." Lieutenant Commander Lisa Park looked up from her station. "The swarm ships are showing signs of fatigue, Captain. Their response times are getting slower, and they're making more mistakes. 3 more ships collided with each other this morning." Jake nodded with satisfaction. This was exactly what he had hoped for. The swarm was built for quick adaptation and overwhelming force. They had never faced an enemy willing to fight along. A grinding campaign that could last for months if necessary. The strategy was simple in concept, but difficult to execute. The Defiant would never give the swarm a chance to fully analyze and copy their tactics. Every few hours, the human ship would change its entire approach to combat. Sometimes they fought like pirates, using hit-and-run attacks from behind asteroids. Other times, they acted like miners, using industrial equipment to tear holes in enemy hulls. They had even spent one memorable day fighting like a garbage scow, literally throwing trash at the swarm ships until they retreated in confusion. Captain called Communications Officer Betty Walsh. "I'm getting strange readings from the swarm fleet. It sounds like they're having some kind of argument." Jake raised an eyebrow. "An argument? Between ships? More like between different parts?" "Of their collective consciousness," Betty explained. "Some parts want to keep fighting us, using copied alien tactics. Other parts want to try something new. A few sections seem to think we're not actually a threat at all." This was better news than Jake had dared hope for. The swarm's greatest strength had always been their unity. If that was breaking down, they were becoming vulnerable in ways they had never experienced before. "Sir," reported Navigator Helen Price, "we're approaching the outer edge of the system. Should we turn back toward the center?" Jake studied the tactical display. The Defiant had been leading the swarm ships on a chase through the entire solar system for days. They had fought battles near gas giant planets, through asteroid fields, and even in the corona of the system's dying star. Each environment had given the human ship new opportunities to confuse and frustrate their enemies. "No," Jake decided. "Let's see how they handle deep space combat. Take us out into the void between systems." The Defiant's engines rumbled as the ship changed course, heading away from the Helix Nebula and into the empty darkness between stars. The swarm ships followed, but Jake could see on his sensors that they were becoming more spread out. Their perfect formation was falling apart. Chief Engineer Danny Cruz's voice came over the intercom. "Captain, I've got something new for you. Remember those emergency beacons we've been carrying? I've modified them to broadcast on swarm communication frequencies. We can use them to confuse their coordination even more." Jake grinned. Danny had been the hero of this entire campaign, constantly coming up with new ways to turn ordinary ship equipment into weapons. "Do it, Chief. Let's see how they like a little electronic warfare." The Defiant began launching modified emergency beacons as it flew through space. Each beacon started broadcasting false signals on the frequencies the swarm used to coordinate their fleet movements. Within minutes, the effect was visible on the tactical display. Swarm ships began moving in random directions, following contradictory orders from the fake signals. "This is beautiful," laughed Lisa as she watched enemy vessels bump into each other and fire on their own allies. They can't tell which signals are real and which are ours. But Jake knew they couldn't keep this up forever. The Defiant was a tough ship, but even human engineering had limits. They had been fighting continuously for almost a week, and the strain was beginning to show. Several systems were running on backup power, and they were running low on everything. From food to ammunition. "Gary," Jake called to his weapons officer, "what's our ammunition status looking like?" Gary checked his displays. "We're down to the emergency supplies, sir. Maybe 2 days of fighting left if we're careful. Chief Cruz has been making new projectiles from spare parts, but we're running out of spare parts too." Jake nodded grimly. They were approaching the moment when they would have to make a choice. They could withdraw and try to reach a friendly port for resupply, or they could make one final push to finish off the swarm fleet. The problem was that there were still over 200 enemy ships left, and the Defiant was just one vessel. Captain Betty called out urgently. I'm getting a transmission from outside the system. It's Admiral Kethfer. Jake felt his heart jump. The Zephyrian admiral had been presumed dead when his flagship was destroyed at the start of the battle. Put him through. The main screen flickered to life, showing Admiral Kethfer's familiar blue face. He looked exhausted, and his uniform was torn, but he was alive. Captain Morrison, he said, his voice filled with emotion. I cannot believe what I am seeing. You have been fighting the swarm for 6 days, alone.
Admiral,
Jake replied. I have the best crew in the galaxy with me. Kethfer shook his head in amazement. My sensors show that you have destroyed or disabled over 300 swarm vessels. The enemy fleet is in complete disarray. How is this possible? Jake smiled. We fight differently than you do, Admiral. Don't try to match their strength with strength. We use patience, creativity, and stubbornness. Human qualities that apparently work pretty well against adaptive enemies. I've gathered the survivors. Of the original fleet, Kethfer continued, 57 ships from 7 different species. We are prepared to return to the battle and assist you in finishing off the swarm. Jake looked at his tactical display. The surviving alien ships would be a huge help, but only if they followed his lead, Admiral. If you want to help, you'll have to fight the way we do. No energy weapons, no standard tactics, and no predictable patterns. Can your people handle that? Kethfer was quiet for a moment. Captain Morrison, 3 days ago, I would have said that human military doctrine was primitive and ineffective. Today I am asking you to teach us how to fight like humans. We will follow your orders. It was the apology Jake had never expected to receive, and the recognition he had never asked for. But there was no time to savor the moment. The swarm ships were beginning to regroup, and they were showing signs of adapting to the Defiant's latest tactics. All right, Admiral, Jake said. Here's what we're going to do. Forget everything you learned at the Academy. Forget every regulation about proper military conduct. We're going to fight like pirates, scavengers, and miners, all at the same time. And we're going to keep fighting until every last swarm ship is either destroyed or running away. The combined fleet began to form up around the Defiant. Zephyrian cruisers, Arcturus destroyers, and Corvin battlecruisers took positions alongside the slow human warship. For the first time in galactic history, alien vessels were following human tactical doctrine. Jake looked around his bridge at his exhausted but determined crew. They had done the impossible, turning a hopeless battle into a winnable war. Now they had to finish what they started. All ships, Jake announced over the fleet communication channel. This is Captain Morrison. Welcome to human-style warfare. It's going to be loud, messy, and probably illegal by most military standards. But it works. Let's go hunt some swarm ships. The combined fleet accelerated toward the confused mass of enemy vessels. The final phase of the battle was about to begin. This time the swarm would face not just one unpredictable human ship, but an entire fleet that had learned to fight like humans. The galaxy was about to witness the complete destruction of an enemy that had seemed unstoppable just 1 week ago. The final battle did not begin with a charge or a heroic speech. It started with Captain Jake Morrison teaching the most advanced military minds in the galaxy how to fight like junkyard dogs. The combined fleet of 57 ships hung in space, near the edge of the Helix Nebula, facing what remained of the Void Swarm. 200 organic vessels clustered together in a confused mass. Their perfect coordination shattered after a week of fighting the unpredictable human tactics. Listen. Carefully, Jake announced over the fleet communication channel, forget everything you know about proper warfare. We're going to fight dirty, fight ugly, and fight until they give up. Admiral Kethfer, I want your energy weapons completely powered down. Commander Stone, put away your fancy missiles. Captain Jones, forget about formation flying. Admiral Kethfer's voice came back over the radio, sounding uncertain. Captain Morrison, my crews are trained for precision combat. I do not know if we can adapt to your methods. You'll learn fast, Jake replied, or you'll die. The swarm adapts. 2 organized tactics. So we're going to be completely disorganized. Every ship fights independently. Use whatever you have available as weapons. Garbage, spare parts, even your emergency supplies. The key is to never do the same thing twice. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Park looked at Jake with concern. Are you sure about this? It's asking alien crews to abandon their training in the middle of battle? Jake nodded grimly. It's the only way. The Swarm has been studying alien military doctrine for a week now. They know how Zephyrians fight, how the Arcturus commanders think, how Corvin tactics work. They've never faced a fleet that refuses to follow any doctrine at all. The attack began with the strangest sight in military history. Zephyrian cruisers started firing their waste disposal systems at swarm ships, launching everything from kitchen scraps to broken equipment. Arcturus destroyers used their mining lasers to cut random patterns in enemy hulls. Corvin battlecruisers began ramming swarm vessels while playing loud music over their external speakers. The swarm ships tried to respond, but their collective consciousness was overwhelmed by the chaos. Every time they thought they understood the pattern of attack, it changed completely. Ships that had been firing projectiles suddenly switched to ramming attacks. Vessels using energy weapons would suddenly start broadcasting nonsense signals or deploying sensor probes as weapons. This is insane, muttered Commander Stone as he watched his destroyer crew turn their medical bay into a projectile launcher. We're fighting with surgical tools and bandages. But it was working. The swarm ships began to retreat, pulling back toward the center of the system. Their organic hulls showed signs of confusion and distress. Some vessels fired randomly in all directions. Others simply stopped moving entirely, as if their controlling consciousness had given up trying to understand what was happening. The combined fleet pursued them relentlessly. Captain Jake Morrison led the charge in his slow, battered Defiant. Followed by alien ships that had learned to fight like humans in the span of a few hours, the pursuit lasted for days. The fleet chasing scattered groups of swarm ships through asteroid fields and around planets. Chief Engineer Danny Cruz had outdone himself during the final push. He had turned the Defiant's garbage disposal into a railgun, converted the ship's laundry facilities into chemical weapon dispensers, and somehow managed to make their coffee machine shoot superheated steam at enemy vessels. Chief Jake called down to engineering. How are our systems holding? Up. We're running on spare parts and pure stubbornness, Captain, Danny replied cheerfully. But she'll keep fighting as long as you need her to. The end came not with a massive explosion, but with a whimper. Ow. The last group of swarm ships simply stopped fighting and began to flee the system. Their collective consciousness had finally been broken by weeks of exposure to human unpredictability. The organisms that had once moved in perfect harmony now scattered in all directions. Seeking escape from an enemy they could not understand or defeat, Admiral Kethver's voice came over the communication channel, filled with amazement. Captain Morrison, the last swarm vessels are leaving the system. We have one. Jake looked around his bridge at his exhausted crew. Communications Officer Betty Walsh was slumped over her console, asleep at her station. Weapons Officer Gary Collins was held upright only by his safety harness. Navigator Helen Price had bags under her eyes that made her look 10 years older, but they had done it. The slow, mocked human warship and its crew had accomplished what the greatest fleet in Galactic history could not. They had defeated an enemy that seemed unstoppable. All ships, Jake announced. This is Captain Morrison. The Void Swarm has been defeated. Stand down from combat operations and begin search and rescue for any survivors in the debris field. Aftermath of the battle was almost as surreal as the fighting had been. Alien crews who had spent the last week learning to fight like humans now had to remember how to act like proper military personnel again. Many of them seemed reluctant to give up their newfound chaotic fighting style. Captain Sarah Jones of the Corvin cruiser Thunderstorm contacted the Defiant directly. Captain Morrison, my crew is asking if we can keep some of the modified weapons we developed during the battle. They say fighting like humans is more fun than fighting like Corvins. Jake laughed. Tell them they're welcome to keep whatever they want. Just remember that human-style warfare only works when you really need it. Don't use it on your friends. Over the following days, the rescue operation revealed the full scope of the victory. Thousands of survivors were found in the wreckage of the original battle, people who had been given up for dead. The planet that the swarm had been attacking was badly damaged, but still inhabited. Most importantly, the swarm itself seemed to have been completely broken as a fighting force. Admiral Kethfer came aboard the Defiant to personally thank Jake and his crew. The proud Zephyrian commander looked very different from the alien, who had dismissed human capabilities just 2 weeks earlier. "Captain Morrison," he said formally, "I owe you an apology. I believe that human military technology was primitive and ineffective. I was wrong about everything." Jake shook the Admiral's hand with all 4 of his arms, following Zephyrian custom. "You weren't wrong about our technology, Admiral. Our ships are slower, our weapons are weaker, and our tactics don't make sense by normal standards. But that's exactly why they worked." "I do not understand," Kethfer admitted. "The swarm was built to fight logical enemies using logical tactics," Jake explained. "They could adapt to any organized military force because organization follows patterns. But humans learned warfare on a planet where the environment was constantly trying to kill us. We learned to be stubborn, creative, and willing to fight dirty when necessary. Most importantly, we learned that sometimes the best strategy is to have no strategy at all." Word of the victory spread throughout the galaxy faster than light. The story of the slow human warship that had defeated the unstoppable swarm became legend. Military academies across the galaxy began teaching courses on human tactical doctrine. The phrase "fighting like humans" became synonymous with unpredictable, creative warfare. But for Jake Morrison and the crew of the UES Defiant, the most important victory was the respect they had earned from their alien allies. No one would ever again dismiss human ships as too slow or human tactics as too primitive. The galaxy had learned that sometimes the most dangerous predator was not the fastest or strongest, but the one with the patience and determination to outlast any enemy. The Defiant limped back to Kepler Station for repairs, accompanied by a hero's escort of grateful alien vessels. As they docked, Jake looked out at the other ships in the fleet. They flew a little differently now, with less rigid formation and more creative thinking. The entire galaxy had learned something important about the value of human persistence and creativity. The slow warship that everyone had mocked had taught the universe a lesson that would not be forgotten. In a galaxy full of fast ships and powerful weapons, the humans had proven that sometimes the tortoise really could beat the hare. All it took was patience, stubbornness, and the willingness to fight a war that could last as long as necessary. The void swarm was gone, scattered to the dark spaces between stars. The galaxy was safe. And everyone finally understood why humans had survived on one of the most dangerous planets in known space. They never gave up, no matter how bad things looked.